Hi, my name is Estrella Rodriguez. I'm from Ponce, Puerto Rico, in the south of the island, and on September 16th, 2017, my whole life changed. I didn't have electricity in my home for 3 months. My dad's farm didn't have electricity for a whole year. We couldn't keep food in the fridge, and I couldn't go to school. But I was one of the lucky ones. My friends didn't have electricity for a longer time. They didn't have roofs over their head, and at the end of the day, you don't realize how important electricity is until it's taken away from you. Thanks to this project, I have hope that the electricity will be reliable in the future.
Renewable energy is not a new concept. Before the industrialized economy, we mainly relied on the renewable rate of nature like energy from the sun. Industrialization transformed energy into a commodity, a reserved privilege due to a so-called scarcity.
But we have to remember that this notion of scarcity exists because we are operating on a definition of using finite resources, which implicitly assumes depending on fossil fuels.
Indeed, in thinking of renewable energy as a way to save money and create new jobs, we have to reframe the perceived notion of energy as something that is industrially produced and consumed.
We have to instead see energy as interdependent ties between all forms of matter, and dare to question the externalities that our economy does not quantifiably factor, but people's lives qualitatively internalize.
In focusing on the efficacy of solar energy in Puerto Rico, we recognize that what is economically feasible should be economically just, and what is economically just, by definition, should be environmentally just for the long term.
We are Dana,
Maddie, Estrella,
and Olivia.
And over the past 4 months, we have been researching and talking to experts from public utilities, think tanks, universities, nonprofits, and even the Puerto Rican Senate to determine not only if Secretary General Guterres' statement is right, but more importantly, who it is right for.
On September 16, 2017, Hurricane Maria devastated the island and caused the longest blackout in U.S. history.
The status of Puerto Rico as a U.S. colony since 1898 is a major contributor to the economic and environmental justice issue post-Hurricane Maria. Puerto Ricans are second-class citizens and have no input in federal laws or agencies which affect them. According to a Harvard study, an estimated 4,645 lives were lost due to the mismanagement of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority, or PREPA, the inadequate federal response and national response.
Colonial laws like the 1920 Jones Act, which requires all goods to enter through U.S. ports, stagnated resources for relief like new electricity poles, potable water, and food items. Most importantly, it increases the price of imported fuels, which account for 98% of energy production.
PREPA is a bankrupt monopoly with severely neglected infrastructure. It is a quasi-private entity, meaning it is owned by the government but functions as a private corporation. This structure lends itself to corruption and mismanagement because it functions with less oversight and strict supervision than is expected in the private sector. And it is not subject to the same privileges as a government-owned entity. Over the last 78 years, it has contributed $9 billion to the $74 billion national debt.
PREPA's energy profile reveals one of the main factors in its ultimate decline. In the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017, 47% of Puerto Rico's electricity came from petroleum, 34% from natural gas, 17% from coal, and only 2% from renewable energy. After conducting preliminary research on renewable energies, we've concluded that solar energy is the most viable, given the ability for solar to be decentralized and deployed individually or on a community level.
Solar in Puerto Rico is not a new idea. The largest solar plant in the Caribbean opened on the island in 2016. Most energy, however, is fossil fuel-based and monopolized by PREPA. The damage wreaked by Hurricane Maria presents an opportunity to redress the environmental injustices of an energy system that has been cyclically vulnerable, inefficient, and unaffordable. As a nation, we have to grapple with the fact that this moral reckoning has been overdue for 121 years.
The idea of building a new grid has taken off since the storm and is an incredibly timely topic. Our conversation with Senator Salheimer and grid alternative policy expert Tom Feigl revealed that Puerto Rico is currently in the process of figuring out management and distribution plans, a lot of this taking place behind closed doors. The IRP aims to create 8 connected regional mini-grids over the next 20 years that are then broken down into smaller microgrids that decentralize generation.
Solar remains the most untapped energy potential of Puerto Rico because of its deployability, decreasing costs, and the island's abundance of sunlight energy. When the power went out after Maria, the main issue was not the energy generation itself, but incredibly damaged distribution lines. Implementing a decentralized microgrid system in place of the island-wide grid allows energy to be stored closer to customers with more modernized interconnection that helps prevent a long-standing outage. Power that withstands outages is also contingent on having battery storage. After Maria hit, residents whose solar panels had fixed connections to the impaired PREPA grid were unable to use them because they had no storage.
A microgrid is a local energy grid with control capability, which means it can disconnect from the traditional grid and operate autonomously, becoming its own island of power. There are three main types of microgrids. A solar farm is a large-scale collection of solar panels, whilst a community microgrid typically takes the form of solar panels that are installed in one central location and managed by community members. Finally, an individual household application is a small collection of solar panels belonging to one household, or often referred to as rooftop solar.
The use of community solar and solar farms might be better than rooftop solar because the latter are contingent on stable roofing, and many people in Puerto Rico have not yet been able to refortify their houses, relying on flimsy aluminum or even blue tarp roofs.
What the aftermath of Hurricane Maria revealed was that it was the transmission and distribution networks in Puerto Rico that lacked resilience. In contrast, approximately 75 to 95% of residential solar systems across the island remain physically intact. Therefore, investing in solar energy and storage can improve grid resilience and outweighs risk of damage. Hurricane Maria had a $43 billion impact on Puerto Rico. Even before the hurricane, Puerto Rico's economy was already in structural decline, with gross national product and population falling by at least a percentage point a year since 2006. Out of the $320 million awarded by FEMA for Hurricane Maria-related costs, more than a whopping $250 million was allocated to PREPA, in an economy with an 18.1% unemployment rate, where electricity costs are twice that of the mainland, and electricity sales have declined 18% since the 2008 recession. It is difficult to predict future market conditions. The declining population due to migration further shrinks gross domestic product, which, coupled with the disruptions in transmission networks and delay in customer billing, declined energy sales by 22% in the 2018 fiscal year. Technology maturation and economies of scale for solar and battery storage have improved rapidly, making levelized cost of energy assumptions for the next 2 decades cost competitive with the current oil-based grid within the next decade. Costs for photovoltaic systems are falling at an annual compounded rate of 1.5 to 3% a year, and storm hardening technology, such as deep anchoring of ground-mounted solar, makes renewables increasingly resilient to hurricane conditions.
By being distributed in nature, renewables support reliability and resiliency. By segregating the system into electrical islands, this ensures the integrity of supply to critical loads and can power water treatment facilities, medical clinics, and emergency dispatch centers in an immediate aftermath. We learned that gross energy sales are projected to decline at 0.23% per year, which allows us to estimate peak demand. Due to little seasonal variation, peak demands are easier to calculate and energy potential is high.
We used Project Sunroof, a beta tool developed by Google that estimates solar potential, to examine different areas of Puerto Rico and their potential for distributed generation for solar. Our findings concur with studies carried out by researchers from the University of Puerto Rico and Mayagüez that by using only 65% of roof surfaces on current structures in the island, it is possible to generate 100% of energy consumed in peak hours. Through Act 82, which defines renewable portfolio standards, if PREPA shapes up, with strict policies, Puerto Rico could easily meet its 20% quota by 2035 for renewable and alternative sources, even benefiting in the next 2 years from the full 30% in investment tax credits.
In summary, deploying solar would allow Puerto Rico to finally decommission its aging generators and minimize the need to build for higher peak loads, reducing system costs and improving energy efficiency. There are massive long-term cost savings that should be considered with upfront capital costs. Furthermore, there is the positive externality of mitigating the macroeconomic impact of fuel price volatility on the island's economy.
In this way, Puerto Rico builds electricity reliability and resilience in terms of ample disaster preparation, financial incentive and accountability, sustainable physical infrastructure, and long-run macroeconomic growth.
In response to Secretary General Guterres' statement, an environmentally and socially just shift to renewables requires heavy input from Puerto Ricans themselves. In this same speech, he says, "Technology is on our side, but bringing renewables to Puerto Rico is far from simply being a technological intervention. For example, Puerto Rico cannot bring in large-scale contractors for a short period of 3 months. It should hire local engineers already available to work on this energy transition in the long term. This way, the money invested into the local economy experiences a trickle-down multiplier effect whereby more locals benefit. In other words, his statement is only true if an aggressive and equitable policy agenda accompanies the technological intervention of solar. Other benefits such as creating new jobs, wasting less water, boosting food production, or cleaning the polluted air is contingent on being adamant about putting the well-being and livelihood of Puerto Ricans first.
Examining economic feasibility is not simply the long-term payoffs or balancing revenue and costs. Scrutinizing economic feasibility requires confronting the intrinsic issue of economic justice being bound to environmental justice. It requires redistribution of environmental burdens and benefits.
The economic and environmental justice issue has been reinforced in the lives of Puerto Ricans due to a historic disparity in political status, financial corruption, and mismanagement. Due to risky investments and a new burden of energy production created by the collapse of the old system, Puerto Ricans have little to no political agency, which establishes a common mentality of distrust and complacency with the current situation, reinforcing the island's sense of inferiority and inability to self-govern.
As many scholars and experts we interviewed said, renewable energy requires a mass community buy-in, but deeply seated distrust and skepticism makes a buy-in extremely difficult.
On a systemic scale, this issue is unequivocally linked to the status of Puerto Rico as an unincorporated territory, in turn undermining democracy on the island, which has sociological impacts on the people of Puerto Rico.
For example, the debate over the number of deaths as a result of Hurricane Maria and the lack of accountability by the administration on the federal and territorial level showcases the disposability and relative worth of Puerto Rican lives. Additionally, the standard of living of Puerto Ricans is significantly less than citizens on mainland U.S.
As a direct result of the second-class citizenship, a fiscal control board established by PROMESA in 2016 was imposed by the federal government without input from Puerto Ricans. The injustice of PROMESA cannot be understated. It has removed autonomy, self-determination, and democracy from the process.
It aims to restructure the debt of the island, and while it has prevented the island from defaulting on its own debt, its interests are directly aligned with the mainland U.S. investors of PREPA. The lack of autonomy in deciding how and when to pay PREPA's debt presents a barrier to the necessary transformation of the energy grid and places Puerto Ricans in a vulnerable position in the inevitable event of another natural disaster. Perhaps the restructuring of PREPA and moving toward a renewable future without addressing the structural inequalities is economically sound for investors, but is this economically just for the people?
The irony of operating under existing relations and legal precedents is that you cannot introduce reform to a system that by default reinforces old corrupt practices. Central to this argument is whether energy is viewed as a privilege or as a right. Whilst this moral and ethical answer is obvious, the economic, technological, and historical aspects are not.
The unreliability of PREPA has given rise to the possibility of decentralization through community microgrids and individual generation. This democratizes energy production within vulnerable communities and empowers people to create their own energy security. However, as Miles Lennon stated in our interview with him, it also places the burden of energy production on the people instead of holding the utility and government accountable. Is placing this additional burden on the people a just means of transitioning the grid?
In conclusion, deploying solar with an aggressive policy agenda that meets ambitious renewable portfolio standards should be our new standard.
Our video script, bibliography, interview transcript, and background notes are in the hyperlinks. Thank you to those who were interviewed for this project, and thank you for listening.